In Romans chapter 1, verse 1, he said, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, which he had promised afore by his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection from the dead, by whom we have received grace and apostleship, for obedience to the faith among all nations, for his name, among whom are ye also the called of Jesus Christ, to all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And so I want to share some things with you this morning about what I believe to be some significant things about who the Roman people were. And we're not going to be talking so much about the doctrine in the book of Romans or that kind of thing, which is wonderful in and of itself. And of course it has a very important position in the Bible because it's the first that we find of Paul's epistles. It's not the first one that was written, probably written from Corinth in the time of Acts chapter 20. But so there were other epistles that were written beforehand, but it's the one that we find first in the King James Bible. And of course it lays out all of the important doctrines about righteousness by faith without works, justification by the grace of God through the blood of Christ. All of these, the foundational doctrines of what we have through Paul. But I believe there's another reason why it's the first. And it has to do with, as I say, what these people were. And it makes the book unique. I don't think there is another epistle that it's like in this respect. I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to kind of take our time and as far as what I want to present about them. But if you'll allow me, we're going to read on a few other verses. And so, notice from verse 8, Romans 1 verse 8, he said, First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for you all, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers, making a request, if by any means now at length I might have a prosperous journey by the will of God to come unto you. For I long to see you, that I may impart unto you some spiritual gift, to the end ye may be established. That is, that I may be comforted together with you by the mutual faith, both of you and me. Now I would not have you ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I purposed to come unto you, but was let hitherto, that I might have some fruit among you also, even as among other Gentiles. I'm debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. So, as much as in me is, I'm ready to preach the gospel to you that are at Rome also. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. For it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. And we've commented a number of times about the Roman letter, how that it begins with Paul referring to the gospel of Christ as being the power of God unto salvation. And it ends with him mentioning that it's the power of God to establish according to my gospel, you see. But what I want you to think about with me, first of all, is that he says in verse 8 that their faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. Now, if Paul says, I've been wanting to come to you, I've been longing to come and see you, that I might impart into you this some spiritual gift, and I'm ready to preach the gospel to you, and I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, then the faith that's in verse 8 must be something other than the faith in the gospel of Christ. Now, am I unreasonable in thinking that? In other words, if he says, he begins the letter by saying, your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world. But now I'm ready to come and preach the gospel to you. If that faith was the faith that Christ had died for their sins, was buried and rose again, why would he say, I'm ready to come and preach the gospel to you? if they'd already believed it. So, you see, I think that what he means by that is that they did indeed have faith, but not in the gospel. Now, this brings up another point that I think is significant, that if you'll bear in mind as you read the letter. This is not like the Ephesian letter or the Colossian letter where he says, I've heard of your faith in Christ Jesus, so that he's writing an epistle to people who he knows have believed. He's writing to the Ephesian letter, the Colossian letter are written as being written to saved people. I don't believe that's the case with the Roman letter. I believe he's writing the letter to these people who have believed something, but they're not saved yet. So he's writing the letter to unfold the truth of the gospel of Christ, that they might be established by the letter, you see, understand what the gospel is all about. You see, so if you bear in mind in reading the Roman letter that don't assume that you're reading something that's written to somebody that's saved. Don't assume that. And I think there are things in the letter that will make a little bit more sense. And we can go further and say, well, now he mentions the gospel of God immediately. In verses 1 through 4 there, I separated unto the gospel of God. So there's a possibility that he means that, that your faith is spoken of throughout the whole world, that they have believed in Christ's resurrection. And yet I really don't think that that's borne out by the rest of the letter. So, but they did believe something. And it was well known, and evidently it was something that they were proud of. Now, just to emphasize another point. Verse 13, at the end of the verse there, you see that he says that he wanted to have some fruit among them also, even as among other Gentiles. See that in verse 13? Just to emphasize the point, go over to chapter 11 in Romans. And in Romans 11, read from verse 13. Romans 11, verse 13, he says, For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify mine office, if by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. Here he called them Gentiles again, didn't he, in verse 13. I speak to you Gentiles. So we can be settled on that the Roman people, at least in their birth, were born Gentiles. They weren't his flesh. That's why he said, I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh. In other words, fellow Israelites. So we know that the Roman people are not fellow Israelites. They are Gentiles. Okay? We're settled on that. Well, I want you to keep a finger there in the Roman letter. We'll come back in a minute. But let's go back to the Old Testament. And let's notice the provision that God has made for the Gentiles. I want you to go to Genesis 12 and get Exodus 12. 12 being Israel's number. Those two passages are always easy to keep in mind. Genesis 12 and Exodus 12. Now, in Genesis 11, of course, we have the Tower of Babel. All the people were together, and God scattered them. And it's like he just wrote man off, the Gentiles, so to speak. And up to this point, there's no such thing as a Jew and a Gentile. But we get to chapter 12, and he singles out one man. In Genesis 12, verse 1, he says, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So even though, and I wish I had, 2 or 3 hours that really need to deal with some of these things. I believe that the situation of Genesis 11 is where that passage in Romans 1 comes from about when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imagination. And he says that wherefore God gave them up. In other words, He sent the flood, and here the grandchildren of the people that survived the flood, it's like when they knew God, they glorified Him not as. So it's like God just said, I'm just through with the whole bunch. I'm giving them up, and I'm starting over with one man, and anybody that's going to get a blessing from me is going to have to bless him. And that's the way God fixed it. So that for a Gentile, you see, was not without hope and without God in the world like some of the grace preachers want Ephesians 2 to mean. They want that passage to mean that up until Paul, all the Gentiles in time past were without hope and without God in the world. That's not true. God had made a provision. I'll bless you if you'll bless Abraham. You bless his people, I'll bless you. That's a promise. But you curse him, I'll curse you. That's a promise, you see. So He's made this provision, and even if you think about the Day of Atonement, I may wind up going over today, but this is helpful, because if you think about them setting up the tabernacle, in the wilderness, the tent they carried around with them, and the tribes of Israel were to gather. There was a specific order that they were to assemble in. And of course, this is the east actually here, going that way. But they would set up that outer court, and then of course inside there was the tabernacle proper that was covered with animal skins and whatever. The table of showbread on the right hand, the candlestick there on the left, the laver out here, and the altar. And then there was that veil. There was a golden altar there where incense was offered that represents prayer. But every time, one day in the year, the 7th month, 10th day of the month, that high priest was to take the blood of a bullock for himself and the blood of a goat, which was for the sins of the people, and sprinkle it on the mercy seat there on the ark. And so that blood that was to shed one time in the year was for the atonement of all of the sins of all of the people once in a year. But so those tribes of Israel would be assembled there all around. But also among those people, there would be these Gentiles. Now, they're not Israelites, but they believe in the God of Abraham. They are in association with them. They help them, as the case may be. They're not their enemies. So that when that blood was shed on the Day of Atonement, it counted for those Gentiles. It said plainly in Leviticus 16, Numbers 15, a Gentile could bring a sacrifice. It would be accepted. They're not without hope and without God in the world. They have a blood sacrifice offered by that priest. They have the benefit of it, and so forth. See, so they've been provided for. Now, there's certain things, though. Look at Exodus 12. In Exodus 12, again, the Passover is in the chapter. All of the things of the Passover. In Exodus 12, come all the way down to the end of the chapter, and there in verse 43. Exodus 12, verse 43. He said, And the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. But every man's servant that is bought for money, when thou hast circumcised him, then shall he eat thereof. A foreigner and an hired servant shall not eat thereof. In fact, in case you might want, it's just so you follow along what we're talking about. These people, these Gentiles that were associated with Israel, they had the benefit of the sacrifice and they had the promise of a blessing, but they couldn't eat the Passover. They couldn't participate in that part of the ritual. They had a blessing, but they are still a separate people unless. Come to verse 46. It said, In one house shall it be eaten. Thou shalt not carry forth aught of the flesh abroad out of the house, neither shall you break a bone thereof. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to the Lord. Let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near. Like come nigh, you know. Then let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. One law shall be to him that is homeborn, and unto the stranger that sojourneth among you. So you see what he's saying there? He's saying that if one of these people, they've been around the people of Israel, they believe in their God, they love them, they love the law, that's how they want to live and whatever. Let his males be circumcised, and he shall be just like he was one that is born in the land. No different. He's a Jew, even though he's born a Gentile. So he's every bit a Jew as these other people. His genetics got nothing to do with it. But that provision under the law is made. So see, that's
all through circumcision.
Through the circumcision, yes, exactly. Now, I want to mention something as far as how this relates to Paul's epistles. The Thessalonian people, the Galatians, the Corinthians, this is their situation. Even the people that were in Ephesus to start with. There was an assembly, there was a group in Ephesus during the book of Acts. That's how they are. They have a blessing. They're not circumcised. Else there wouldn't have been a controversy about it in Galatia. That was not necessary. That had nothing to do with Paul's preaching to them in the book of Acts. He said that that's what is meant when he refers to the Jew first and also to the Greek. The Gentile person that was meeting in the synagogue with the Jews. They didn't have to be circumcised to have the benefit of the preaching. And once they believed, spiritually they were one body with the Jew and Gentile in one body. See, they're during the days of the book of Acts. So that it didn't figure into anything. But prior to Paul's preaching, you see, that was as high up the ladder as a Gentile person could go, so to speak. You see, there would be, and maybe this would be another way to think about it. That and we'll do it in reverse order, like where we're concerned. We are referred to there in aliens. Never had a spiritual association with Israel, never had a connection with God, because by the time we were born, that was gone. There was no way to have a relationship with God through Israel's sacrifice. But during the book of Acts, those Gentiles did. It's just like the people in Corinth and the people in Galatia and the people in Thessalonica. Before they heard the gospel, they were like these people. They already had the benefit of a sacrifice. They weren't without hope and without God in the world. But there were some other people that we would more or less be like, and the Colossians and the people that the Ephesian letters written unto. No, they didn't believe the Ephesians believed in Diana. They worshipped a rock that came out of the sky. They didn't have benefit of that sacrifice. They're aliens, and that's us, so to speak. But then, coming up the ladder, you would have had those people who that referred to as Greeks. They're Gentiles that blessed the seed of Abraham, and they had benefit of that sacrifice, even though they weren't circumcised. And but then there is those, and I'm going to use the word. There's a little bit of controversy about what that really means. I'm using it in the sense of Exodus 12. Let all your males be circumcised, and then you'll be just like you were a Jew. In fact, this should, well, like I say, we're going up the ladder, so that's where it fits. But then,
what is that word that you put up there?
proselyte. Proselytes, I'll use it in plural. That's,
I just couldn't see.
no, I'm glad you did. That's fine. And so that's going, backwards order, but that's as far up the ladder as you got as a Gentile. Now, I mean, there were Grecians and they were the Jews, but they would have been Israelites born. We're talking about the Gentile people. Well, let's go back to the Roman letter and go to Romans chapter 2. Now, we've already seen 2 verses that said these people were Gentiles. But in Romans 2, verse 17, he said, "Behold, thou art called a Jew." They were born Gentiles, but they were called Jews. Why? Well, "Behold, thou art called a Jew, and restest in the law, makest thy boast of God, knowest His will, and approvest the things that are more excellent, being instructed out of the law, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind, a light of them which are in darkness, instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, which has the form of knowledge and of the truth in the law." It's like they boasted in the fact that even though they were Gentiles, they were called Jews and had the law. And yet he goes on to say, well, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles through you. Look at verse 25. "For circumcision verily profiteth, if thou keep the law. But if thou be a breaker of the law, thy circumcision is made uncircumcision. Therefore, if the uncircumcision keep the righteousness of the law, shall not his uncircumcision be counted for circumcision? And shall not uncircumcision which is by nature, if it fulfill the law, judge thee, who by the letter and circumcision dost transgress the law?" Why say thy circumcision in verse 25? You see, the thing, I believe it's very plain that the Roman letter is written to a group of proselytes. And I don't believe there's any other letter that's like that. As I say, these were Gentile people that had, they blessed the seed of Abraham, amen, but they were not called Jews. So I believe there's some significance in this why the Roman letter is the first. Because it's written to a class of Gentiles that it don't get no higher up the ladder as far as their relationship with Israel is concerned. And when Paul said, "Thy faith is spoken of throughout the whole world," I believe he means the fact that they believed in the promise to Abraham and the promises to Israel to such a degree that they became Jews by circumcision. But he's preparing them, even though you see up to a point that was good. If you didn't know any better than the law, and you were a Gentile, wouldn't that be admirable to want to be a Jew? I think it would have been. But now, the righteousness of the God without the law is being manifested. And so see that these things that you've been boasting in and brag about, that there's coming a change. Now there's a benefit from your relationship, and that's the reason I'm writing to you, because the gospel of Christ is to the Jew first. And so there's an element in the Roman letter that is just so marvelous. It reveals the tact that the Apostle Paul had. The ability to deal, you could, and I tried to emphasize that when I read that little passage there about them knowing His will, and they're a teacher of the. In other words, he's kind of getting on them about their, well, you boasted all this, but you break the law, it makes it nothing. I thought, you that teach a man shouldn't steal, do you steal? You see? So we just want to establish, though, that thing, that evidently, that this is a church of people, this is a group of people who are proselytes. Now, and they're called Jews. He said so. We'll come over to chapter 11, and before we go further, he's preparing them. Romans 11, verse 11. He says, I say then, have they, Israel as a nation, that God, as he said up in the chapter, he's not cast them away yet. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid. But rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I'm the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, and might save some of them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? So let's put something else up here right quick, and we'll say, and I believe this is the way it is. There's again another controversial thing that I believe that the fall of Israel took place when they didn't recognize him. When he rode into Jerusalem, they denied him before Pilate. They said, crucify him. We have no king but Caesar. They cursed, the people of Israel cursed the true seed of Abraham, which is Christ. And so it's through their fall they crucified him, and whereby salvation came to the Gentiles. That's what I believe. But nevertheless, through the book of Acts, he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And so the preaching of the resurrection is done unto the people of Israel. And as they reject that, they're being diminished. I believe that entails the whole period of the time of the book of Acts until we get to the end there, when at AD 70 they are cast away. So the letter is written, though, during this time of the diminishing. They were not yet cast away. And he refers to something here in the context. In verse 16, he says, for if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. So he refers in here to this olive tree. Now, we're going to come back to this, Lord willing, in a minute. I want you to go back in the Old Testament to Judges. Book of Judges. Joshua, Judges, Ruth. The book of Judges. Judges chapter 9. In Judges 9, this man that is making this parable was Gideon's son. But anyway, in Judges 9, verse 8, he said, the trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them, and they said unto the olive tree, reign thou over us. But the olive tree said unto them, shall I leave my fatness, wherewith by me they honor God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? And the tree said to the fig tree, come thou and reign over us. But the fig tree said unto them, should I forsake my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to be promoted over the trees? Then said the trees unto the vine, come thou and reign over us. And the vine said unto them, should I leave my wine, which cheereth God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? And then said all the trees under the bramble, come thou and reign over us. And the bramble said unto the trees, if in truth ye anoint me king over you, then come and put your trust in my shadow. And if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. Now, the bramble is pretty easy to identify. He turns out to be the Antichrist. But the olive, the fig tree, and the vine, you see, all represent blessings to the people of Israel from God when He's reigning over them, when He's their king. So that you have these three types of trees that symbolize different forms of blessing from God unto the people of Israel. And so we want to talk about them, what we can find out about them in the Scripture. And rather than deal with the olive tree first, since it's the one we're really going to concentrate on, we're going to touch on the other ones first and then come back to the olive. So he refers there in verse 10 to the fig tree. Come over to the book of Luke. In fact, maybe I'll just go ahead and put this up. We're talking about the fig and the vine, and then, of course, he said the olive. Now, in Luke chapter 13, interesting how these things work out. In Luke 13, verse 6, Luke 13, verse 6, he spake also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and sought fruit thereon, and found none. Then said he unto the dresser of his vineyard, behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? Now, you don't have any trouble figuring out what that's all about. Here was the Lord began His ministry, and for 3 years in there sought fruit. That sweetness. I love, somehow or another, these things that just get to me in this book. The sweetness of a man's testimony, of his speech. And in other words, Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. I mean, that's the fruit, that sweet fruit that I was seeking, that I was looking for. Words to come out of the people's mouth, and instead, no fruit. We have no king but Caesar. And so, and it's amazing to think about the dresser. That's the only time that word's in the King James Bible. And if you look it up, it means a vine laborer, a husbandman, somebody who's tending the vines. And so, evidently, the dresser represents the Holy Spirit. So he said to cut this thing down, Israel. This verse 7, then said he unto the dresser of his vineyard, behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig about it, and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well. And if not, then after that thou shalt cut it down. And he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. That year represents the time of the book of Acts, when the Holy Spirit came, and the ministry of the 12, and all. And yet, they stoned Stephen. They persecuted Paul. In other words, by the end of the book of Acts, he cut it down. Now, there's verses we'll see about even though a tree is cut down, yet it'll sprout again and grow. But for the time being, you see, here in Paul's salvation is during this time. Here we are in the dispensation of grace, and that fig tree doesn't exist. And it represents physical the national blessings of the people of Israel. National blessings. And it makes me think too, see in the millennium, that it says that they won't get through reaping until there'll be the tractor coming back behind planting for the next season. The nations of this world are going to be blessed physically because of the blessing that is going to come on Jerusalem and on Israel. National blessings, the physical blessings. That fig tree represents those things. Now, the vine, go to Isaiah 5. Take Isaiah 5 and Matthew 21. Isaiah 5 and Matthew 21. In Isaiah 5, from verse 1. He says, "Now will I sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard and a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with the choicest vine and built a tower in the midst of it and also made a winepress therein. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge, I pray you, betwixt me and my vineyard. What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof." I believe that represents angelic protection. "I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up, and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. Wasn't one stone left upon another. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be pruned, nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry." And there really isn't any difference there pertaining to what we saw pertaining to the fig tree. Because it coming to find the fruit was the appearance of the Lord. And look at Matthew 21, it's very clear. And the men that heard this parable knew Isaiah 5, and they knew what the Lord was talking about. And if you'll just bear with me, we kind of just need to read the whole thing. So verse 33, Matthew 21:33. He said, "Hear another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard, and hedged it round, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants, and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another," what they did to the prophets. "Again he sent other servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, They will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? They say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their seasons. Jesus saith unto them, Did ye never read in the Scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof." So you see the vineyard, the vine, he said, I've got my well-beloved hath the vineyard, a very fruitful hill, and all these things that he did to it, and he sent unto them his son. And they, well, this is the heir. Thing just brought forth wild grapes. He said, well, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do to it. I'll tear it down. I'll tear down the hedge thereof, and there'll be briars and thorns. That's all that's spiritually in Israel right now. Just briars and thorns. There's no spiritual fruit. There's no the heart. There's no he said about in Judges 9 about the wine that cheereth God and man, you know. And any time in here, though, even though they slew the son, at any time in here during the book of Acts, that nation, he could have caused that nation to bring forth the fruits thereof. And notice the kingdom was being preached, and yet by the end of that time it was cast away. I mean, the hedge broken down. So, but that, you know, the Lord said in John chapter 15, I'm the true vine, and you're the branches. So He's going to plant that again. That land is going to be planted with a new vine, is what it's going to amount to when the Lord comes back. So we've touched a little bit on the fig and then the vine. Well, what about the olive tree? Go to Jeremiah 11. And I believe, if you will, while you're turning, get Job chapter 14. Kind of opposite directions, but Job 14 and Jeremiah 11. We want to read Jeremiah first. In Jeremiah 11, from verse 1, he said, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Hear ye the words of this covenant, and speak unto the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now the word covenant is in Jeremiah 11 5 times. Mentions the covenant. We'll come down to verse 16. Jeremiah 11:16, he said, The Lord called thy name a green olive tree, fair and of goodly fruit. With the noise of a great tumult he hath kindled fire upon it, and the branches of it are broken. For the Lord of hosts that planted thee hath pronounced evil against thee for the evil of the house of Israel and of the house of Judah, which they have done against themselves to provoke me to anger in offering incense unto Baal. Now, this green olive tree is a little bit different, but as I said, in the context, the word covenant is mentioned 5 times. When Solomon built the temple, which, you know, replaced the tabernacle, the cherubim that were over the mercy seat were made of olive tree. We could go in 1 Kings 6, I believe, is where you find it. The olive tree was the wood used to make the cherubim. It was covered over with gold. The doors of the temple were made of olive tree. The post of olive tree. Psalm 52, David said, I'm like a green olive tree in the house of the Lord. I believe the olive tree represents the covenant blessings, where the fig was national blessings. The vine had to do with spiritual ones. I think about how that, you know, it says that in the millennium that they all shall know me, from the least unto the greatest. How come? Because go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them. That's the vine is going to spread forth, you see. And the spiritual blessings, the knowledge of the Lord to cover the earth, waters cover the sea. But this has to do with that covenant that He's going to remember. Right now, He's suspended it, set it aside. It couldn't be otherwise, else you and me wouldn't have the privilege to call on His name right now, because we were, like the Ephesians, aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Look at Job 14, and there's something about this that probably applies to each one of these aspects of the blessing. Job 14, verse 7. Job 14, verse 7. He says, "For there is hope of a tree, if it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that the tender branch thereof will not cease. Though the root thereof wax old in the earth, and the stalk thereof die in the ground, yet through the scent of water it will bud, and bring forth boughs like a plant." I believe that in each aspect here, that once the dispensation of grace is over and the body of Christ is filled up and we're taken out of the way, then that scent of water, maybe through the ministry of the Moses and Elijah, the two witnesses or whatever, that Israel is going to be, regathered again. The Lord is going to save them. They'll enter into the kingdom above the nations, And so each one of those trees will begin to sprout and bud, and the Lord will reign over them, and all of those blessings will be fulfilled in the kingdom. But see, what does that have to do with what we're talking about? Go back to Romans 11. And remembering that this olive tree represents covenant blessings. Romans 11 verse 16 again. "For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root be holy, so are the branches." When it buds again. "And if some of the branches be broken off." And I believe that when Israel said, "We have no king but Caesar. And thou being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Boast not against the branches. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Thou wilt say, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in. Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear." By the way, I want to stop just for a second and just remind you, you can't do grafting without cutting. And I believe there's a reason Paul used that image. Because the Roman people, born Gentiles, they were called Jews, and they were grafted in to the covenant blessings of Israel before they heard the gospel. In fact, the fact that they're hearing the gospel is a proof of the covenant blessing. See, so this is not the body of Christ. The olive tree is not the body of Christ. The olive tree represents just one part of God's blessings to Israel, of which these Gentile people have been grafted in through circumcision. And yet, unless they receive that blessing, they're going to be broken off too. And that privilege only lasted for a while, because by the end of the book of Acts, even the olive tree was cut down. Now, I know some preachers don't believe that. They believe the olive tree continued to exist. Well, only in the sense of it being that stump in the ground. And then the water comes and it buds again. But right now it's not bearing any fruit. And there's no way for anybody to be grafted into a tree that stump's been cut too clean to the ground, So, knowing these things, you see, it helps you to understand that he's not saying that. See, in the past, people have argued against eternal security because of these people being able to be broken off, Where did we get to? Verse 21. Romans 11:21. He said, "For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold therefore the goodness and severity of God. On them which fell, severity, but toward thee, goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, that is, by believing the gospel. Otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. There won't be any more blessing. And they also, even the people that denied him, if they abide not still in unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. For if thou wert cut out of the olive tree which is wild by nature, and wert grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. And I guess you could say that would be the greatest covenant blessing of all, is the forgiveness of sins. When that fountain is opened, the Lord returns, and the blood that was shed here to dedicate the covenant will be established over there, and Israel will have the blessing when God takes away their sins. Anyway, I realize that, as I say, some of these things are a little different from what we normally talk about, and I've wanted to talk about it for some time, but it doesn't really lend itself to every class that I go to. I know some of it might be a little bit hard to follow, and I may not be exactly just pinpointed on track with some of the things, but I believe I've shown enough whereby at least you could see why I believe the Roman people were proselytes. They were called Jews, and yet they had the first privilege. And why that's, I say, I don't believe there's any other assembly, not the Thessalonians, not the Galatians, where the people were, as a majority, circumcised Gentile. They were people that blessed the seed of Abraham, but they weren't circumcised. The Romans were. And they had reached that highest place of a relationship with Israel that was there. And yet for all of that, it was not going to amount to anything if they rejected that gospel that he said, I'm not ashamed of. You see, but now the righteousness of God without the law. And all of those things, why I believe in the Roman letter he mentions Israel 10 times. He mentions Abraham 9 times. So you see that while he would have a reason for referring to them, because their faith up to that point had been in their relationship with the promises. The fact that they could call themselves Jews. But there's coming a day, he said, they're going to be cast away. So I speak to you Gentiles. I'm the apostle of the Gentiles. Anyway, something to meditate on. I appreciate you being in the Bible class today. If you have something you'd like to add or a question you'd like to ask, I'd welcome anything. But
it's the way the Lord works it all. I mean, the more you see it, the more humbled you are by the truth of it.
Amazing to see he didn't mention that right olive tree to any other place in all of his epistles, and in fact didn't mention any of the other trees for that matter, as far as I know. Paul. But that would have been the one that they would have had, as it were, to boast in. That they were.
They had that intimate knowledge of what that olive tree represented, and the fig and the vine.
Right.
And they had that intimate knowledge of what it was to the Jew.
Yes.
In that sense.
And
it presented that way, and God the Father being who he kept that promise of, okay, you guys have done this to my people, I'm going to give you this opportunity first.
Yes.
To me, it's like, you see the real faithfulness.
He's a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. There's one other thing I want to throw in before we stop. We were talking about this a little before the class. It was the day after Father's Day, 15 years ago. And the anniversary of it was actually yesterday when my dad passed away. We lost Dad, right? And I don't expect anybody here to remember. But we met here that day before. I was here and we had the class. And I remember a little bit about some of the things I preached. And I think I've got it somewhere. And I want to go one of these days go back and listen to it. But I was talking about what makes a father is that He's a giver. You know, the Lord said that He knoweth what things you have need of before you ask Him. And the joy of a father is the giving. And thinking about where Israel is concerned, to whom pertaineth the adoption. He told Moses, told Pharaoh, tell Moses to tell Pharaoh, let my son go. And of all of the joy of the Father and all that He is going to bestow on Israel, you know, we lose sight of the fact, because of the day that we live in, of that love that He yet has for them hidden in His heart. You know, and all that He's going to do on their behalf, and all of the blessings that are going to be abundant, and the joy associated with all those blessings, you know, at that time. But we, even though we're not part of that covenant, we still have the privilege to call Him Father through the adoption, you know. And the things that He's given unto us, which aren't really here, they're not like that over there, where their blessings are concerned, but ours are, whatever spiritual blessing there is, He's given it to us. He's bestowed it freely, without asking. It's free every day. Is that what you told me before the class? It's free every day. And it's ours to claim and to rejoice in and be thankful for. And it was His good pleasure to do it. And that men don't get that. You know, the spirit of man can't understand God doing something for him for nothing, you know.